It's 14 months since I installed the Drayton Wiser smart heating system in my old cottage. Today I'm going to be updating you on how I found the system, the upgrades I've made and the other things I've learned since install. And I should add, Drayton have got nothing to do with today's video. They're not sponsoring it or otherwise paying for it in any way. Quick heads up, I'm now on Patreon, and for a small monthly fee you can help support me, get access to loads of behind the scenes footage and most importantly access to my DIYte Discord chat forum. I'd love to have you on board and I'll post a link to where you can sign up in the description below this video. Now, when I first started preparing for this video, I did a post on my community tab, and I can't thank everyone enough for coming back to me in large numbers with their own experiences of using Drayton and also other systems that they recommend. Wherever possible, I'll be referring to those comments throughout today's video. And I'll put a link to it in the description below the video. And I'm not going to be talking specifically today about the DIY install of this system itself. I went through that comprehensively in the original install video, a link to which is coming up on screen now. So what I thought I'd do was summarise my experience at the start, then I'll mention individual components of the system as I go on through the video. Now, you might remember from watching my vid, but previously I had a wired thermostat in this hallway, being the coldest room in the house. And all the heating was controlled in one go with this fairly basic controller, which was installed back in 2010. And in this room, the radiator had one of these basic traditional valves on it, because you don't typically have TRVs in the same room as your wired thermostat because they can compete against each other. Now, the end result of all this was pretty frustrating. The heating rarely got up to temperature. The boiler was always on during the schedule as it struggled to sort of heat the house. And I just assumed that this was the norm, there was nothing I could do about it, until that is, we installed the Wiser system. So with smart thermostats on every radiator in the house, apart from actually two in the bathroom, it's important if your boiler has a pump overrun, which needs to evacuate hot water out of the heat exchanger, that you have at least one uncapped radiator on a traditional valve to enable it to do that. But anyway, with smart thermostats on all the other radiator valves, the heating sort of came alive for the first time really. And I was able to walk around the house fine-tuning the temperature in each room. And in fact, last week, when the weather was a bit warmer, conscious, as I'm sure you are, of the recent spike in electricity prices, I thought I'd reduce the temperature in a couple of rooms and the schedules for those rooms, all of which only took me a few moments. Not massively essential to do this because of the operation of the Eco Smart mode, which I'll come on to in a minute, but it just shows how flexible this system is. I want to talk about how robust the system is now, and to sort of get your head around this, you need to understand how the system works. Now, my hub sits here on the wall in the cupboard under the stairs. And the remarkable thing is we've got this incredibly thick wall pretty much blocking the signal from the hub to most of the house. But with the odd exception I'll come on to, connectivity has been pretty seamless over the last 14 months. And if you look at my floor plan here, you can see where the hub is in relation to all the radiators on the ground and first floors of the cottage. Now, the hub communicates with each device on the heating system, be that wall thermostat, smart radiator thermostat or smart plug, through what is effectively a closed Zigbee mesh network. And without getting too technical, because I'll probably get this wrong, Zigbee works on a similar frequency to Wi-Fi. I found this great explanation on the internet. I'll enclose a link in the description below the vid. But it's very different because the devices on the network operate in a mesh. They basically interconnect to create the network, or they can interconnect. Whereas with Wi-Fi, all the devices have to communicate directly back to the router. They can't communicate with other devices. As it's a mesh, if you have any radiators which are out of range of the hub, you can boost the signal of the hub to those radiators, or sort of bridge that gap if you like, with a smart plug. And what this does is effectively closes a hole in that mesh. Now, one or two people like Prith here have said they wished it communicated over Wi-Fi rather than under the separate Zigbee mesh frequency. But Drayton were quite deliberate in not being reliant on Wi-Fi, because if you think about it, if your Wi-Fi network goes down, then so too does the heating. Whereas this way, if your Wi-Fi network does go down, the heating system with all the schedules still functions absolutely fine. What you do need is for this hub to communicate over Wi-Fi with your router, with your wireless router, so that the hub can access the cloud, and in turn, so that you via the app on your phone can, through the cloud, alter your heating schedules either whilst you're at home or when you're away travelling or elsewhere. So if your internet goes down and takes the Wi-Fi with it, the downside is you're not going to be able to access your heating schedules through the app, although you do have the ability to override the hot water and the heating on the hub itself. Now, internet going down is a real problem here. I've been on airband, which I've got a dish that communicates with a mast on the hill because our broadband is so rubbish in our village. And even with that regularly happening over the last few years, I can't remember having any issues or gripes about the heating system failing. So that really serves to illustrate why it's so important to keep the Wi-Fi separate from the Zigbee network. And in fact, I can only really remember on one hand the instances when I couldn't actually access the app. A couple of times the hub was receiving a firmware or software update, and once I stupidly switched it off in the basement. So the system has functioned brilliantly in spite of the Wiser hub being located behind this thick wall, and the fact that my two wireless access points, which is basically my wireless router in the cottage, are not that close to the hub either. I've got one upstairs on the corridor, and I've got another access point, again behind this thick wall, in another room of the house. So it's all the more remarkable that the hub can communicate so effectively given this situation. And whilst I use a few smart plugs for reasons I'll come on to in a minute, all of the radiators have been able to communicate with the hub without assistance from the smart plugs. And you can't just take this for granted either. I'm trying to install this boundary security system at the moment, which operates on the slightly different Z-Wave network. And I'm having multiple issues at the moment with the connectivity of the hub, both to the router and also to the devices it's trying to connect with. Boundary are blaming it on the atypical nature of my house, but it's located in a much more favourable central position in the house than this. Now, this could be explained away by the fact that Zigbee has apparently better coverage than Z-Wave, but it does nevertheless show that Drayton are obviously getting something very right with the hardware in this hub. Chris has a similar story with his hub in the ground floor utility room and no connectivity issues in a 5-bedroom house over 3 stories. Now, I know this isn't everyone's experience. Phil pointed out that whilst he couldn't fault the kit, the app has been painful at times, throwing him off, requiring him to log back in, forgetting his schedules, forgetting the room order that he'd sort of rearranged, and not making changes that he'd asked it to through the app. And I can only imagine, Phil, that the reason for that is your hub has been struggling to get Wi-Fi connectivity from your router to update the schedules over the cloud. My app was a little bit glitchy when I initially set it up, and there are times where it takes me a couple of goes for a temperature change that I've set to be recorded via the cloud. But overall, it's been absolutely seamless, faultless. I had this smart radiator thermostat go offline, which is in one of the furthest rooms from the hub, very early on in the install, about a month afterwards. I reset the thermostat and I haven't had a problem with it since. And to demonstrate the point, here's me upping the temperature of my daughter's radiator, which is one of the furthest away from the hub. And in real time, you can see how quickly the smart radiator thermostat responds. Now, the lack of a convenient user interface like I suppose you get with the Evo Home is a criticism you sometimes hear about the Drayton Wiser system, which of course is app-based. And whilst this hasn't been an issue for me, I can see it would be if you've got members in the house, possibly of an older generation who aren't used to using phones. This hasn't stopped some of you out there being resourceful. Mark has repurposed one of the kids' old tablets and velcroed it to the wall to give him a really good user interface. And I thought I'd try and bridge the gap with this Google Hub, which I picked up for about 60 quid a couple of months after doing the video. You can access the heating in a couple of ways from the home control screen, as you can see here. One of the quirks of it is that with the heating off, you can't actually change the temperature on the screen. But once you've switched the heating on, you do have the ability to alter the temperature of each room on the screen of the hub, as you do if you turn the heating on by voice control. Set the kitchen temperature to 19 degrees.
Okay. Setting kitchen thermostat to 19 degrees.
So we've actually found the Google Nest Hub, as it's now called, to be a great additional interface for the Wiser heating system, amongst other things. But the voice commands themselves have also been criticised as being quite limited. Here's a list of the main ones that are available, and you can also ask Google to sync your devices, which is handy where, for example, you're adding a smart plug and you want it to appear on this hub. But one of the main commands they haven't included, which they should have done, is a boost all command, which is something you get on the app. The basic kit comes with the room thermostat, which also is included in the next kit up, which comes with 2 smart radiator thermostats. But again, this is a bit clunky, albeit useful, again, for somebody who doesn't have access to the app. What do I mean by clunky? Well, it's just that to alter the temperature in a room, you have to just keep bringing it up like this in the bottom corner, then you have to hold your finger on the button in the middle to tell it how long you want that temperature to last for. Some people ask me why you need one of these thermostats if you've got smart radiator thermostats as well. Well, it's a good question. It's twofold really. Firstly, it comes with a basic kit as a way to get started with a smart heating system, if for example you can't afford to buy any valves at that point. But also, even when you've got your smart radiator thermostats, it's good for somebody in the family who doesn't have access to the app. It's also good where you've got radiators in inconvenient corners with bad air circulation in a room, and the radiator thermostat isn't therefore able to power that room radiator to a representative heat for the room. So one of these wall thermostats, put that in the same room, it takes priority over the radiator thermostat and you get a much more accurate temperature. So they do have a place on this system. I've got to say, we don't really use this very often. My wife did before I installed the app on her phone. And again, it probably helps keeping the temperature in this room a bit more accurate. And what about the smart radiator thermostats? Well, you can't really fault these, in my opinion. Some might say they lack a temperature reading on them, which again would be good for people who don't have access to the app. And Suzamar270 loves the fact that their Tado smart radiator thermostats have humidity as well as temperature sensors. Although quite how accurate a humidity sensor would be so close to the radiator as it is, I don't know. But the simplicity of the design of these and the fact that they are manufactured in Britain, I think is a major plus point. The radiator thermostat feels good quality, and since a firmware update midway through last year, they're even quieter than they were on launch, which I thought at the time was quite enough. And actually I really like hearing that very dull whirring around the house as the heating system kicks in. Any problems? Well, I mentioned earlier the one that went offline, and I had another one behind this radiator cabinet that, following replacement of the batteries, seemed to lose its charge far too quickly. But I replaced the batteries, as I'll come on to in a minute, and put a smart plug in the kitchen in case it was a connectivity issue on the network, and it seems to have been fine ever since. Let's talk about batteries for a minute, because I think fear of having so many batteries powering smart radiator thermostats around your house is what I suspect has held quite a lot of you back from installing one of these smart heating systems. And a few of you have said in the comments below my community posts that you really wish these things could be hardwired to circumvent the need to use batteries. In terms of my own experience, the Pair Dear batteries that were supplied with the thermostats lasted really well for about a year or so, and then the app told me very quickly, one by one, that they needed replacing. So I bought these Duracell Optimum batteries. I'm not an expert on batteries, I just thought they looked pretty good. And they seem to have managed okay, but I thought to myself, I've got to be able to do better than this, certainly long term. I don't want to be having to spend a lot of money replacing the batteries every year. So rechargeable batteries for a system like this are obviously the holy grail, but a couple of factors hold you back. Firstly, typically rechargeable batteries haven't been available in 1.5 volts. And secondly, where you can get 1.5 volt batteries, they tend to be lithium, and we're told not to use lithium batteries so close to a heat source like a radiator because they like to be kept cool and could therefore be a fire risk if they heated up. However, the heat from my radiators never really transfers into the smart radiator thermostat. And so the eternally brilliant Sam on my Discord chat forum recommended a couple of 1.5 volt rechargeable lithium ion batteries to try out. And so I settled upon these from Amazon as a little bit of an experiment. They don't need a charger, as you simply plug the cable that comes with the batteries directly into your socket or an appropriate charger and wait for the lights to go from red to blue. These batteries have been in operation now for about 6 months and they've worked absolutely seamlessly. Now, the downside of these batteries being lithium is typically, as you will have noticed if you've got this system, the app tells you as the battery strength gradually gets lower. But with lithium ion batteries, it's not going to do that. They just drop off a cliff at the end as the battery management system protects the battery from fully decharging. Decharging, is that a word? So you don't get those status updates on the app, but what you will get is a notification when the radiator goes offline, when the batteries have switched off, which is, to my mind, all I really need, because that is my wake-up call to take the batteries out and charge them up. And there's another point to be aware of. The app generally tells you when these Pair Dear batteries it came with need replacing, but I don't know whether any of you have noticed, but there's still a lot of useful charge left in these batteries, as I've found when we've been swapping them out for sort of things like games consoles. So you're wasting quite a lot of energy when you start replacing these things. So the rechargeable batteries, whilst being a lot more expensive up front, aren't going to give you that problem. However, before you rush out and buy these batteries that I've recommended today, I'm going to put a bit of a disclaimer on their use. Just because mine have worked and haven't overheated doesn't necessarily mean yours will. And you're probably invalidating the smart radiator thermostat warranty if you start putting in batteries that they haven't tested and recommended themselves. And on this point, Mike ruined one of his smart radiator thermostat batteries by swapping out the original batteries for rechargeable ones. I don't know what voltage Mike used. So proceed with caution if you're going to go down this route. Now, I can't really do this update video without mentioning these little smart plugs. When Drayton first brought out the Wiser system, there were inevitably people for who the mesh network didn't quite work because of brick walls around their houses and stuff. And so Drayton sent out a third-party range extender to help sort out those initial teething problems. They then developed this little smart plug as a permanent solution to the problem, which is a range extender for the Zigbee mesh network on one hand and obviously a smart plug on the other. When the plug socket is switched on, the plug operates as a permanent range extender, and then you use that little button on the top to turn on and off your smart devices, or indeed through the app, which I'll come on to in a minute. Now, people say you can obviously get smart plugs much cheaper than this online, and of course you can, but those smart plugs are just plugs, not range extenders. And whilst these plugs aren't necessary for me in terms of connectivity of my smart radiator thermostats to the hub, they've become an absolutely essential part of my day-to-day life now, in terms of helping me to save electricity. This editing suite here, for example, has a plug underneath, well, a series of plugs actually, that switch everything off, and I could never be bothered to stoop underneath to switch them off at night. I've got one of these now connected to a plug tower, and I've scheduled for the whole lot to go off at midnight if I haven't already switched it off. And it's a similar story for the kitchen TV and a couple of other devices around the house. And there's a third function of these smart plugs that not a lot of people know about at the moment, and that's energy monitoring through Insights Plus, which I'll come on to in a minute. Now, I wanted to quickly talk about updates because Drayton have always been quite good at taking on board comments or criticisms from customers and acting on them with updates to the app. And they brought out two pretty chunky updates this year. Insights Plus is something I'll come on to in a minute, but I want to mention right now Moments. On a system that's very schedule driven, which has limited the voice commands that you can do through Alexa and Google, as we've just seen, Moments is nevertheless an attempt to give us a bit more customization, and largely resolves a bit of a criticism I had when I set up the system. Through Moments, you can, at the touch of a button, activate heating in one or even a series of rooms to a set temperature. Now, I find this very useful when I'm working from home and just want my study heated, but you could of course just do that by turning on the study heating. What's really good about the Moments though is, for example, you can set up a weekend moment where you just want all of the downstairs heating to come on, or this bedtime moment I've set up, which basically switches off everything that it can, heating and devices, when you go to bed. All that at the touch of one button, and each moment has been handily added to the top of the home screen for ease of access. And so we move on to energy savings. Now, Drayton claim on their website that just switching to a best practice thermostat can save 12% energy alone and 6% more with a smart internet connected thermostat. Being able to control your heating room by room with a smart radiator thermostat saves up to 18% energy usage. And away mode and eco mode, the two smart modes on the Wiser system, can save an extra 14% and 2% respectively. Eco, by the way, is where the Wiser system switches off your heating early, depending on the weather, and after it's learnt how well your home retains its heat. Now, I'm going to disappoint some of you here because I can't put an exact figure on the energy savings in my cottage since installing this system. Partly because I've got heating oil sat in a tank in the garden, so it's quite hard to gauge how much I've got through. And the app here doesn't help, as I've just realised it only goes back 3 months. Drayton, this is something I think you need to fix. But on the past, it has delivered up some pretty chunky savings, as you can see here for August. And as usual, you've been brilliant in telling me the savings it's delivered to you. Chris Scott, for example, says his gas use is down 30 to 35%. And you've only got to scroll down the room in the app when the heating's on to see just how many rooms have been switched into eco mode because they've reached the desired temperature. Now that has to be saving us money. And you can see this in action, how Wiser takes into account the thermal efficiency of our homes and the outdoor temperature to tailor our heating by looking at the heat reports in the Insights section of the app. And these do go right back to when I installed the system. Now, another confession here, whilst I did set up away mode when I installed the system, and I've also got IFTTT running, which basically uses geofencing to trigger away mode when I leave the building, I haven't really used it since setting up the system, partly because I'm here most of the time, and secondly because I'm the only one in our family who's got IFTTT set up. so I don't want to accidentally trigger it when I leave the house and somebody else is here. It is a really good idea though, and I know a lot of you have away mode in operation. Enhanced insights are available through the Insights Plus option, which came out several months ago. If that is, you're lucky enough to have a SMET2 smart meter. Sadly, mine is only SMET1, so Insight Plus is not available to me unless I get my meter upgraded. And from speaking to Drayton the other day, I understand they're going to be using Insights Plus to shift us away from thinking of the Drayton Wiser system as just a heating system, more into thinking of it as an energy management system. Insights Plus will be able to analyse your heating by reference to the tariff you're on and tell you exactly how much your heating costs for a particular period in time. They're also looking to venture into managing your EV charging and even your usage of things like your power bank, charged up from solar panels on the roof. So exciting times beckon for Insight Plus users. Now, I can't do a video like this talking about energy savings without mentioning OpenTherm, which it was hoped would supercharge savings across the board that people get from their smart heating systems, or any heating system for that matter. What do I mean by OpenTherm? Well, typically when you call for heat from your boiler, it either switches on fully or switches off when the desired temperature has been reached. The idea of OpenTherm is that through electronic controls, your boiler can modulate. Or to put it another way, it only turns on to the desired power required to heat a particular room according to a particular schedule, thereby making the boiler operate more efficiently and using less fuel. Now, it was hoped that OpenTherm would become industry standard with all the boiler manufacturers subscribing to it to make our lives as consumers as easy as possible. But sadly, as always, this hasn't happened. Manufacturers have decided to create their own version of OpenTherm, typically to tie us into their systems by signing up to extended warranty periods as a quid pro quo for adopting their control systems. For example, Worcester Bosch have got EMS, which is their particular variation of the system. And the upshot of this is that if you take the Drayton Wiser system, for example, the only kit they have which adopts the OpenTherm protocols, even though the wiring is available in all the hubs, is the Wiser kit for combi boilers. John Giles got me excited by pointing out that there's a knee-fit OpenTherm adapter that he was hoping to be able to fit to his Worcester Bosch boiler. I got a Worcester Bosch as well, but sadly my 10-year plus old Green Star Camray system boiler cannot be fitted with OpenTherm controls. And even if it could be, I was advised by Worcester the other day, then I'd need to revamp my plumbing system and fit an integral diverter valve to adapt my S-Plan system for the EMS Worcester Bosch controls. So what does that mean for us in the meantime? A lot of you out there, going back to, for example, Sam on my Discord group, says that his boiler does support OpenTherm, but as I said earlier, very little of it. So he doesn't use OpenTherm at all. And what happens if you don't have OpenTherm on systems like the Drayton Wiser is that Wiser operates what's called load compensated control, basically to kick the boiler on and off when required. Now obviously this is a much less elegant, more reactive way of heating than a self-modulating boiler which would fire up only to the capacity required to heat a particular room. And even with OpenTherm, the problem is that by operating the boiler at much lower power, it's going to take longer to get that particular room you're trying to heat up to temperature. Albeit once it's there, it'll maintain the temperature much more consistently than a boiler that's constantly turning on and off. Now, the other point Sam on my Discord forum made was that it's important you don't have a boiler that's oversized. His, for example, can only modulate down to 6 kilowatts, so you have to be very careful not calling for heat in just one room with, say, a 2000 watt radiator, since the rest will be shoved out the flue or the boiler will just short cycle, switch on and off all the time, which isn't operating efficiently. But there is still plenty we can do to make our central heating systems more efficient, and right up there is the critical importance of balancing our radiators, something that I have to confess I haven't even done properly here. In short, you want to have all the radiators on your system having the same resistance to flow. Now this is a bit of a rabbit hole as well, because the lock shield valve is typically what you would alter to balance your radiator, the lock shield being the valve on the non-TRV or smart radiator thermostat side of the radiator that typically is on the return pipe back to the boiler. And the problem is, depending on who's manufactured your lock shield, it'll operate differently. There's a good video by Heat Geek on this, which I'll put a link to in the description below my video. So on some lock shields you can maybe open it a half turn to correctly balance your radiator, but on other lock shields you'd have to turn it a few times with your Allen key to get the same rate of flow. So it's almost impossible to analyse how much flow you've allowed by making, say, a half turn on that lock shield valve. There are a couple of ways you can do this, but they're fiddly. One is to buy a digital thermometer thermocouple sensor and have clamps on both the flow and return pipes to measure the temperature coming in and going out of the radiator. You want the return pipe temperature to be no more than the magic 55 degrees at which water reaches its dew point. And this is critical because above that temperature, your boiler, if it's a condenser boiler like mine, won't condense. And it's when the boiler's condensing that it's operating truly efficiently. If it's not condensing, it's using up too much energy and costing you money. The other option is to buy an automatic balancing kit, like this Danfoss, where the balancing is done in the TRV itself rather than in the lock shield. James from Plumber Parts does a brilliant video on this, which again I'll enclose a link to in the description below. But my issue with this kit is it comes supplied with a TRV valve, and of course I've got all my smart radiator valves already. Watch this space, I will come up with a solution for this and I'll do a video on it as soon as I can. And so we move on to the final section really, subscription services and or the longevity of the kit. Bram raised a really good point about the danger of being tied into paid services, which is why he didn't go with Tado, or just your system being rendered obsolete by the manufacturer going bust. Bram went with Evo Home in the end because it's a fully functioning standalone system, albeit without the insights and a hub interface that some of you have said is looking a bit tired and needs updating. Dealing with the issue of premium services, some smart heating suppliers like Tado, with their £2.99 a month auto assist feature, charge for certain premium elements. Interestingly, Drayton haven't done this to date, and you might say that their opportunity, or their big opportunity to do this, came and went when they brought in Insights Plus, but didn't convert this to a subscription model. Now, there's no guarantee, of course, that they won't do that in the future, but it's great that for the time being at least, Drayton have decided not to go down the subscription route. But if you're worried about paying a premium for automated services, or you're worried about having invested so much money in all this hardware, the manufacturer going bust at some point, or perhaps you're looking to do away with the cloud altogether, you could embrace the Home Assistant open source software. Now, this is a bit of a rabbit hole which I have to confess I don't think I'm tech savvy enough to go down. But if you're quite techie or you're willing to learn, and you can get hold of a small computer like a Raspberry Pi, or perhaps off-the-shelf hardware like Odroid, you can integrate your smart heating system into a sophisticated home automation ecosystem where you're powering multiple devices, including your heating. For example, Mike's integrated Wiser into Home Assistant and can schedule away mode so he doesn't have to remember to turn it off, and has better control over valve signal strength and can activate heating schedules based on occupancy. Millie, meanwhile, uses it for better information graphs and a better view of how the house reacts to the weather. Millie kindly copied me the integration they've used, and I'll post a link to it in the description below this video. And this just shows you some of the features that come within the latest software update for the integration. Now, as I've said, I'm not sure I've got the time or the technical savvy to embrace Home Assistant, but I'm certainly going to keep an eye on developments. A couple of things to end on. Firstly, Drayton had bought out an underfloor heating controller since I did my video, and also an electrical heating switch to control larger devices like heated towel rails and electric or plinth radiators. And I should probably sign off on this video by saying this isn't just about Drayton. In the community tab, and in fact in the comment section below my original video, you'll find a wealth of comments, feedback and experience from people with their various different smart heating systems. Evo Home, we've talked about, was the industry leader for many years, although as I said earlier, Antoine says it's looking a bit dated and of course doesn't have the energy saving insights. Tado is probably the other front runner other than Wiser. Type 17 has Netatmo, and they've installed the Netatmo weather station outside, which is more accurate than relying on the regional weather. And Hive have also featured, although a lot of you have said that certainly in recent times they've had problems with their smart radiator thermostats. Maybe that's been fixed now by a firmware update. I don't know, maybe you can let us know. So please check out the comments for more information, and I'll post links to them in the description below this video. And clearly I'm going to have missed stuff here. It's just occurred to me I haven't mentioned the open window detection on the Wiser smart radiator thermostats, which I don't think is particularly good. I've been into rooms where the heating's been on and the window has been open. So do please let me know in the comment section below what I've missed and what your experiences are, as this will massively benefit anyone watching who's thinking of getting one of these smart heating systems. So I hope you found this video today useful. I don't really think I need to sum up, as everything has already been said, other than perhaps to conclude by saying I'm really pleased I installed this system, given how reliable and bulletproof it's been over the last 14 months. Don't forget, you can access the description below this video for all of the links and other things that I've mentioned today on your smartphone by clicking on the little arrow, and on your PC by clicking on the Show More button. Massive thanks as usual for supporting my channel, and of course if you are new to this channel it would be fantastic to have you subscribe. You can do that by clicking on the link here, and don't forget to click the bell notification icon so you get notified of all my future uploads. See you soon.